Porchetta. This juicy, marinated, incredible piece of Italian pork is to die for. The best porchetta I've eaten in Italy was cooked with fire. These traditional methods are cooked slowly for hours to create deep flavours and incredible crispy skin. But when these traditional recipes get adapted to be made in a regular oven at home, the results can be a little disappointing in comparison. You either get juicy meat and no crackling, or great crackling and dry meat. It's a tough balance to get right. Today, I want to change that. So, my plan is simple. I want to create a tender, juicy, authentic tasting porchetta covered all over with light, crispy crackling. But there's some restrictions. I have to use my home oven to cook it, I can't use any specialist equipment, and it can't take the whole day to prepare. To make this happen, I'm going to weave traditional and modern methods together into one effective recipe. I'll cut through the jargon and leave the food science at the door. This video will just be about method and results. It'll be a straightforward approach that anyone can achieve. I haven't seen any other porchetta recipes using these techniques. I'm really excited to share this with you. So this is where the recipe starts, in a not very traditional way. But this first step is what's going to give me juicy tender porchetta with a crisp skin. In this pan I have 1 litre of water, 3 bay leaves, 10 whole black peppercorns, a couple of rosemary stalks and some parsley stalks. These are just aromatics that will give this water a little flavour. But the 2 important ingredients are a generous shot of vinegar, I'm using cider vinegar, but this could be any kind, and a heavy pinch of salt. These 2 ingredients are going to help the skin become light and crispy, rather than hard and chewy. Then I'm putting that onto a low heat to infuse the flavours into the water, whilst I get on with the other steps of the recipe. Now I'm going to get started with the thing that makes a porchetta a porchetta. This is probably going to ruffle a few feathers, because this marinade changes from region to region in Italy. Down in the hot south they add things like fennel pollen and lemon, and in the more central regions like Umbria, there are versions on the opposite end of the spectrum that use ingredients like chopped kidneys, hearts and liver. Basically, the options are endless, and there's no right or wrong way of seasoning your porchetta. The pattern that I did find after studying 100+ recipes is that most of them use garlic, sage and black pepper. Then to that I'm adding a handful of fresh rosemary, a handful of parsley leaves, a heaped teaspoon of fennel seeds, and the zest of a lemon. I'm going to encourage you to use whatever you have at home. Oregano, chili flakes, thyme, sausage meat, black pudding, pancetta or some smoked ham. A small amount of mint would also be delicious combined with some other herbs. The options really are endless. I've written a few versions in the recipe section on my website to give you an idea of good combinations. There's no right or wrong way. There's no rules, so let your imagination run wild. And why not use up some ingredients left in your fridge? I believe this is how porchetta now has so many variations, from cooks trying different things out. So I've just done what's known as a Jamie Oliver and rough chopped everything together with my knife until it looks something like this. If you want to learn how to handle a knife with confidence like this, then check out the link in the description below. You could do this in a food processor as well if you don't mind some extra washing up. However you decide to do it, in the end you should have something mostly green and smelling delicious. The recipe is in the description and it has all of the quantities there so you can easily divide or multiply for however many portions of porchetta you want to make. For this porchetta, I'm using one of my favourite cuts of pork. It's tasty, affordable and widely available. Of course I'm talking about pork belly. This is a 1 kilo piece of meat and it will be enough to feed 4 people. There's a simple trick I'm going to do to make this porchetta as flavourful as possible. First, trim off any major bits of silver skin that you can see, parts that look like this, and if there's any large pieces of fat you can remove a little of them as well. Then I'm going to make a horizontal cut going through the middle of the meat. I like to find a separation in the meat somewhere and work with it to get this cut started. If you've not used a knife in this way before, then give this a go. Just take your time, use light strokes, and the meat separates a lot easier than you think it would. I'm going 95% of the way through, so it kind of opens like a book, like this. Before doing this book cut, I just had this much surface area for the marinade to go. Now I've tripled that because I have here, here, and here. Not only is this going to give me a more flavorful meat, it's also going to make this belly much easier to roll, which I'll show you in a minute. And to take this flavoring a step further, I'm making some crisscross incisions in the meat, not too deep. This is just giving the marinade some more surface area to work with, and some places to sit. So as much marinade stays inside the meat as much as possible when I roll it, rather than just getting squeezed out of the ends, which can sometimes happen. Next, I'm seasoning each side of the meat with salt, and I'm putting a generous amount on the skin as well. I like to press and massage the salt a little into the skin to help it stick. Next, I'm spreading the marinade evenly over the pork, everywhere but the skin side. And I'm really rubbing it in so it gets into all those score marks I made earlier with my knife. With the skin facing down, I'm starting with the section of the belly that's just meat and rolling it up as tight as I can. If I hadn't made that long horizontal book cut earlier, then this rolling step would be a lot harder, and it wouldn't look as good once it's finished. All the marinade will just be bunched in the center, around here. And once it's cooked, I would end up with a big hollow section that would look something like this. So I really recommend doing this book cut. It's one of those small 1% that makes a big difference to the end result. It's a win-win with an extra win. Next, I need to tie it to keep it all together. There are some overly complicated ways of tying meat, but I'm going to show you my favorite way, which is really simple. With the flap facing down, I like to start with the first piece of string exactly in the middle. The knot is simple. It's just like when you're starting to tie your shoes, and then you just do one extra loop. This helps to stop the knot from loosening when you're tightening it down. Then once it's tight and you're happy with the position, just do one more of these kinds of knots, and that's it. It's really easy. With the next piece of string, I'm going roughly halfway between the first piece and the end of the pork belly. Then repeat the same for the other side. Then I'm just using one more piece of string in the opposite direction, tying everything together, keeping this porchetta tight. That's one rolled and tied porchetta ready for the next step. At this stage, you could place this in your fridge for 12 to 24 hours, and the marinade will just get better and better. But you can also cook it straight away, which is what I'm doing. Now, for the part of the recipe that will definitely have the most eyebrows raised. But there's a method in my madness, which I'll explain in a minute. I'm going to poach this porchetta in this liquor for around 90 minutes. This is going to achieve a few things. The salt and the vinegar in the water are going to help break down the skin and give me a great crackling. And as water can only reach boiling point, it makes this a really safe, stress-free way of cooking the meat and keeping it tender. Top up the water if needed so the liquid is just above the porchetta. So I have two options from here. I can either keep it lightly simmering on the stove like this for 90 minutes, or what I'm going to do is place it into the oven set at 120 Celsius and just leave it to do what it needs to do for the next hour and a half. I prefer the oven technique because it's completely hands-off. As long as there's a lid on the pan, I don't need to check on it or worry about a thing. If you choose to do the oven technique, just make sure the pan is simmering before it goes into the oven. Otherwise, it will take a very long time to come up to temperature. 90 minutes later and this porchetta is ready for the next step. Place it onto a tray and leave it to steam off for 15 minutes. This is a crucial step to get great crispy skin. This porchetta is now cooked. If I put a thermometer into the middle, it's reading just under 90 Celsius, which is a good place to be for pork belly. But obviously I need that crispy skin, and I'm going to achieve this in the next stage. Whilst that's steaming off, crank your oven up to 250 Celsius. "15 minutes later and my porchetta is no longer steaming. And if we look closely at a before and after, we can see that 15 minutes ago, the skin looked a lot wetter than it does now. Dry skin produces a lot better crackling than wet skin. Now to help the skin crisp up even better, I'm brushing on a little cooking oil and a light seasoning with salt. Just before this porchetta goes into the oven, there's one more thing I can do to help it out. Right now, it's just sitting on the tray. This isn't great for a few reasons. The first is that the part touching the tray tends to overcook and get a bit tough. The second is the edges of the tray protects the bottom part of the porchetta from the hot air blowing around the oven, and this creates an uneven crackling process. Luckily, there's a few solutions to this. One is to use some kind of vegetable like a carrot or onion slices underneath the porchetta. This lifts it up off the base of the tray. But my preferred way for this recipe is to use a wire rack over the tray. This gives great air circulation all the way around the porchetta. Once the oven is up to 250°C, load the porchetta in. Oven temperature is so important at this stage. I really recommend getting one of these cheap little oven thermometers, because built-in thermostats in ovens most of the time aren't very accurate. And the difference of 20 degrees in temperature in this moment of cooking can be the difference between great crackling and not so great crackling. I'll leave a link in the description to one of these oven thermometers. They're super cheap, reliable, and totally worth having. They take all of the guesswork out of cooking like this. How long each porchetta needs in the oven will vary at this stage. It will be 20 minutes at the least, and at the most it could be around 50 minutes. Exactly 37 minutes later, my porchetta is ready. I've got corner to corner crackling covering all of the meat. And after a 15 to 20 minute rest, and not forgetting to remove the string, I can slice into this and show you just how perfect it is. I have tender juicy meat, authentic porchetta flavouring layered all the way through the pork, and a great light crisp crackling. This is one of my favourite recipes I've made this year. Go check out this video next for another one of my favourites.